Season 5, Episode 11, German Work, Arbeit. Is German work a standard of work? Trajce asks as he recounts a story on a manager who berates his Aussie teammates. Yeah, effing stupid, the manager tells his staff. Even mid-employment dispute, this manager showed no contrition. He believed he was forced to speak in this manner, Trajce elaborates, because the culture of work in Australia was far too lazy and lackadaisical, apparently, for him. Sara shares a story reflective of the New York work culture, while Alan encourages the teams to unplug from it all. What a curious episode. Enjoy this one. Ya, ya, ya.
Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Create a new path, don't let the people follow your signs. Educate your mind.
Hello, and welcome to the Why Work podcast, a series of playful legal dissections on the most curious and alarming events in the world of work. The podcasters Alan Girl, Trajce Svetkovsky and Sara Pazell debate how to craft a better experience of work. Sit back, relax and enjoy. And remember, none of the things we talk about today should be construed as legal advice or any other type of advice. We're just here to talk about all things related to work.
This is so good.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Trajce, you're always on top of the English legal profession. Are there any new lessons that we can get out of them? Anything other than you've told us about before?
Well, yeah, still staying in England, it's still some more examples about occupational hazards of being a lawyer, and also...
So wait, there's more.
There's more, wait, there's more.
Wait, tell us.
I was a set of steak knives, and I use the word knife because my second quick story does involve a knife. But the first one simply is this: ex-barrister sentenced over anti-Semitic posts.
Oh dear.
So I know we did a bit of solicitor focus, but we're doing barrister focus. So lawyer is the term used generically. Solicitor, it's quite a divided profession, both in Queensland here as well as in the UK or in England. You have barristers and you have solicitors. So the profession's divided, but they're all lawyers. So my point to this is the responsibilities are all the same. A lawyer is a lawyer.
So let's cut to the chase. What was the post?
Yes, well, the former barrister who repeatedly published anti-Semitic material in blog posts has been sentenced. This is a criminal matter and that person has been suspended. So two takeaways here: the fact that it is a criminal prosecution, and secondly, the use of technology and the use of blogs. The relevant police trawled through a year's worth of posts from this particular barrister and found persistent comments about his hatred of Jewish people. So he was disbarred as a result of these appalling behaviours, and then he was prosecuted by the criminal prosecution service. They felt that whilst it was a very complex matter, it was justified on public grounds, obviously, because nobody should be subject to such putrid and vile racial vilification. But the real takeaway was that the court deemed it perfectly acceptable to prosecute this case. In fact, what he posted were grossly offensive and criminal claims about Jewish people. It is particularly shocking that a former barrister who is meant to engage the law in the pursuit of justice would express such flagrant hatred. This was stuff about denying that the Holocaust occurred and all these other terrible things that were very hurtful. But I mention it because two things: the person's status, and let's not beat around the bush, being a lawyer is a privileged status, end of story. And secondly, being so, derelict in your duty by using social media.
I suppose that what distinguishes this case from your earlier one is its repeated behaviour, and it was repeated behaviour over a long period of time.
You see sometimes sports heroes that suddenly come out on social media with personal opinions in some ways that could be offensive, and they lose all their sponsorship dollars, there's revolts, there's kickbacks, and is it, elevated to status of godlike status because you're so famous that you feel you have this platform, or it's just a lapse,
Yeah, who'd know about sports people, but all I know is lawyers do take an oath or they make an affirmation, so immediately there is that sense of serious duty
responsibility.
to the court. So this is serious, and in any context, because you can't send such vile stuff. But more importantly, your profession, it really does matter who you are and what you represent.
I think by today's standards, you shouldn't be saying anything derogatory about any segment of the community.
Absolutely. And so it's just, but what was interesting about this case is you are equal before the law when you are sentenced. So this wasn't a private type tribunal matter he suspended. He was in a public court for all the record to be disclosed. So I mentioned that one. And another one in England, I'm still hanging on to those dreary, rainy days in England. This time, though, it's about solicitors. We often think about workplace exposures. You know, you could be in a mine pit, or you could be in some type of mine shaft. There are all the dangers. But what about when you're just going about your ordinary business and a punter, not even a client, someone off the street comes in to the office, barges in with handcuffs and a knife and says, "I'm gonna kill ya." Why?
Wow.
Because you're a migration lawyer and you're letting rats into the country.
Oh,
Are they the exact words?
The exact words were, you people let rats, you let rats in, and Hitler was right.
Oh dear.
It gets worse. He says,
can it get much worse?
so not only did he say he was right, also that he should have got rid of you and finished you off.
So what happened? What was
So this solicitor was a migration lawyer. That's all that's happened.
And what happened to the person that came into the making these?
It's currently on trial, so obviously he was charged
Yes.
with various criminal offences, including going armed publicly. So whilst he accepts a lot of those charges at this stage of just following the proceedings, at this stage he's accepting that he walked in with a weapon under the Weapons Act. However, he's denying various other charges.
Do we know his state of mind? Was he suffering any mental illness?
At this stage, we don't know. It hasn't been, the trial is just continuing. But
I guess what it does highlight is that in any profession, any workplace, extreme things can happen.
yes, I would say at this stage, I don't think there's nothing in it to suggest there's some type of diminished responsibility. The fact that it's going before the court and, for example, there hasn't been some sort of submission made about this person being diminished.
So he's got sufficient capacity to know the difference between right and wrong.
It's before the court. It's on trial. So it's just an interesting scenario. For me, it was that, we often think about all the dangers of those involved in blue-collar work, but here is a person who doesn't even know the offender.
Look,
Just happens to be a lawyer, so he's going to be threatened to be killed.
there are tax offices
Yeah.
that don't put any shingle out on their front door to say tax office, ATO satellite offices, because they have to protect their workers from people walking in complaining about their tax claims.
Isn't that frightening? That's the stage we've reached in society. I understand if there was nexus, like in a disgruntled client. We've had cases like that before, or mental illness. Remember about 30 years ago in Brisbane, in Eagle Street, there was a fellow who held hostage a group of lawyers. I'll have to Google this for next time.
Did that actually happen?
However, this person was clearly suffering some type of delusion. I do believe he was diagnosed with a mental disorder. Now, there's one more thing I want to mention.
Are we still in England?
No, we've gone back to Yatala.
Oh, yeah,
We're in
Yatala.
Brisbane, Queensland.
Which is Queensland, Australia. Okay,
Yes.
tell us about Yatala. Is that the home of pies?
The home of pies, but this wasn't the pie shop. It was actually a sporting type manufacturing business. It was an Austrian business in Australia, and the case, on the face of it, it's squarely about, of course, one should never ever tolerate abuse in terms of swearing, yelling, berating, and just essentially being aggressive as a manager or even as a worker in the workplace. So the case involves bullying. However, when you scratch beyond the surface, there are more aspects around this case which I find particularly fascinating. So essentially it involved a manager from Germany, and the manager came to Australia in about 2010.
So been here for a long time.
Been here for a long time, and this manager felt that Australians quite simply didn't work hard enough or to the standard that one should work in this line of work, which was sporting goods. So this person would continually tell people to work harder. German work was the term used by the court. And it was a fascinating case because the court said that even though it was an Australian entity, this manager felt that the Australian workers weren't performing to the level required of German demands.
And this is a German manager, so therefore you do as he says. Okay.
So he didn't deny...
Was there any actual analysis of whether or not the workers were performing as well as the German workers, or was that just a fiction, something he created in his mind?
Well, he would constantly complain to his superiors in Europe. But interestingly, you should say that I did read a report dated 2020 relating to work comparisons, and a study was made where apparently German workers were compared to Australian workers, and Australian workers were working to 84% of the standard of the German workers.
So there's a thing in the stereotype. Okay.
There's possibly something in his
German
stereotype.
work.
So he was warned, though, by his superiors in Germany, look, there's an Aussie culture, that was the term used, and look, bit more inferring, I suppose, bit more sort of chilled out. Look, reassurance was given that work was being done, but in this person's mind, the work was not being done to that standard.
So it's funny because I've worked with multinationals, and so, for example, I'm imagining one company from New York, and we would laugh in Australia and say the New York company just thinks that all of Australia is a suburb of New York. Right? They analyzed the market the same way as though it were a New York suburb, and they mandated work relations and activities and didn't even consider local jurisprudence in some of the decisions that we made. And we were raising the flag going, you do know the laws and regulations in this country, but it was really centralized.
Yeah, but that's laws and regulation, and that's different.
No, I'm talking about the whole culture and the belief of work systems, the week of work ethics. I'm talking about everything. So we talked about this all the time, is that they're treating the workers all across Australia with this company as though it's a suburb of New York.
Yeah,
right?
it's interesting.
Had a different belief of how you must show up, what time you show up, what time you leave, what your level of commitment was. It was New York time, New York ethics.
So it's interesting because the court said, it was his perception that the employees were not working. So to answer your question,
so they used the word perception.
Yeah. So,
and
they were working. They're working.
I'll give you one phrase in this New York example. One of the New York managers said to a colleague, a team member here in Australia, and said, sign the document. It's not like I'm putting you in concrete shoes and putting a gun to your head. I'm like, you don't really say that in Australia. That doesn't really fly. That's not a way to motivate people.
Yeah, it's interesting that we talk about these cultures because reading between the lines, I think he was yearning for a certain type of respect, and the court recognised that the employees were not giving him the respect that he expected or demanded. Now, of course, you might say, well, what did he say or do not to earn the respect? For example, he did not deny that he said to one worker, you're stupid. Okay. By the same token, he didn't deny that he said to that worker, you're effing stupid.
The F-bomb again.
Yeah, he's got no issue with that.
You're all about the F-bomb today.
Today's about the F-bomb, but in a different context. There's no alcohol's involved.
So I'm struggling to think of any situation where it would be okay to call someone stupid.
Never. Oh, that was just some of the other things where you're not working hard enough, just all the usual berating. So it was a culmination, and people were fed up with this person's aggressive and constant berating, and this went on for quite some time. So eventually, to cut a long story short, this fellow was dismissed, an action was made.
The manager?
Yes, the manager was dismissed. So he took action against his company for wrongful dismissal. He didn't deny any of the allegations about his behaviour. In fact, he justified them to say, I had no other way to motivate them. So when I swore, I didn't particularly swear at that person specifically. I swore generally because the system of work wasn't to the standard that's expected. And I latched onto that because he was talking about some type of atmospheric frustration. And you know what came out? So that's the first part. So you might think this case is just about bullying,
No, it's
aggression.
about reasonable management action. That's what it's going to be about.
No, it's not.
Oh.
He said his swearing was reasonable. Was a reasonable management
No,
plan.
but the business's decision to let him go.
No, it's not even about that. Reading beyond that. No. I think given that this was ongoing and sustained attack on workers, I think the business was justified in letting him go. Because
So this is an action he brought in the Fair Work Commission?
Remember this over a period of time. They said, listen, you've got to pull your head in. So there was this reasonable...
Well, that's the reasonable management action.
And it was sustained. So it wasn't just a one-off. They didn't ignore... In fact, there was a lot of communication between the manager and also the owners in Europe. So this was... They're trying to improve things. So they're saying, look, calm down a bit.
I think there'd be lots of managers out there who are finding it difficult to manage, and they might be told by their superiors, you've got to ease it back a bit, you're being too aggressive with your staff.
They did.
And they really struggle with that. You know,
They did.
they're
Because they
trying
still
to
got
find a way.
KPIs to meet,
Yeah.
right?
So, what was frightening though, and this is why I seized on this case, not because of the aggression, that's low-hanging fruit, that's pretty easy to analyse. The court also said it was my impression that over time he had become increasingly worn down by work.
Right, so he's vulnerable as well as an aggressor. So dual role. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in other words, he's an aggressor because of a system of work is kind of what they're saying is that caused him to get to a point where his psychosocial protections no longer existed. He was easily triggered. He was in a state of anxiety.
Well, what was
Yes.
the end result? Because
Well,
it's
the
been
end
hard to
result
have
was-
this
yeah.
conversation without knowing how it
Yes.
ends.
The end result was this, that none of his claims about the dismissal were...
Successful.
None of them. However, where he was successful was that he did get his leave, which he was duly owed, because during this period of frustration, he was begging for leave, and the employer wouldn't give him his leave. So not only was he successful on his unpaid leave claim, he was given, this is the perpetrator, was given $10,000 for the distress caused to him by the employer. So that's
So-
the only point he won.
But does that admit culpability where in fact the employer could have mitigated this earlier, given his leave, mitigated his duress, his
Yes,
state
I
of
think the
anxiety?
extra $10,000 indicates that, yes.
Yeah,
Potentially, yeah.
but they still were allowed a
To sack
dismissal
it.
was
Yeah.
was considered fair. So could that be appealed and still fought?
Well, it's possible because you could because this is just the decision of the court at first instance. So it's
Right.
possible that there could be an appeal, but of course these things require...
It does come back to process, doesn't it? If
Time, effort, money.
You've got a worker, doesn't matter whether they're a senior or a junior worker, who's having troubles, it's really important to get that process right.
For me, this case reflects back to when you would talk about a person's kindness and benevolence eroding over time. Now, here's the thing. I don't think work caused this person to be like this. He was already...
I was going to ask you, was he ever kind and benevolent?
That's the thing.
Right.
So, but the environment, the atmosphere in which this person was placed was like, like a ticking time bomb. So he's been parachuted into Australia. He's not happy with the culture.
Right.
So he turns up his aggression and pretty much saying, harden up, mate,
Which was inappropriate.
which was inappropriate. And I
But
wonder...
work didn't come in and say, we need to train you, we need to teach you how to be a manager.
Instead, they said, look, this is just the Australian way and we get through this. And so during this period of time, he did ask for breaks, he did ask for leave, but they said, look, work's busy, you've got to keep going, you've got to keep
What
working.
a complex case to adjudicate on.
Yeah, he may have had trait anxiety. The system of work triggered that and put him quickly into a state of anxiety. He wasn't able to manage and mitigate and regulate that state of anxiety in such a way that he could be responsive and supportive to his employees. And the neurobehavioral driver of serotonin, that issue of need for status, you do not have German work attitude, right? The status.
The German work ethic.
Just the German work. This is not German work, this is Aussie work, implying instead of hard work, this is lazy work, is what this is expressing, right?
That's
in his
right.
views, from what I'm interpreting.
Yeah,
right?
that's
There's
right.
the serotonin.
They said
I
that they were
reckon there
entitled.
could be an appeal in this one.
They said they're entitled to summarily dismiss him because he had breached, the relevant clause.
Oh, they summarily dismissed him.
Yeah, they summarily dismissed him by engaging, and the reason for the dismissal was serious misconduct.
Okay, explain that to our listeners, our subscribers.
When
What
you're
was
summarily
the actual
dismissed.
conduct that was the serious misconduct? Was that calling workers stupid? Because that's pretty serious.
The serious nature was the misconduct of the aggression, bullying. His defence was, you didn't have a bullying policy in place. The court dismissed that. They said it's irrelevant. It's your conduct. So they preferred the evidence of those who were...
Was he legally represented? Or did he run his own case?
Oh, no, he was legally represented by one of the blue chips. So,
I just find that weird because it feels like it's an admission of culpability, at least some percentage culpability on behalf of the employer. And when you say summarily dismissed, that means like it precipitated quickly. Is that right? Like boom.
Yeah, summarily means straight away.
Straight away, boom.
Now, you remember over time the complaints would have been building up. So once, you've got a catalogue of abuse. Like if you have a one-off, so-and-so swore at me or so-and-so...
Well, an employee steals from their employer.
Yeah,
That might be...
boom.
So it's
Grounds
really...
for dismissal.
Summarial dismissal, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating decision because so whilst the dismissal was based on the repeated and aggressive behaviour on the part of the manager, who then put his claim in, it's important because I always think about...
Why were they denying him his leave? I don't understand that.
Oh, what would be the main reason? Why would you deny someone's leave, Sarah? Because you...
Skills and staffing shortages.
Got to be done.
Just got to be done.
It's
No, sorry. I often see in these cases that
Yeah,
a little bit of compromise can go a long way.
So it's interesting that whilst they admired, I find the case fascinating because whilst he even said, you are overworking me, that part of his claim failed. He was doing his hours as expected, but again, it's about perception. So I find it interesting that I think the entity would have known this fellow is a very, very industrious worker. So in a way, and we know that because they're denying him his leaves, they come on to stay a bit longer, do a bit more work. But by the same token, they also know this machine of a worker is completely toxifying the entire workplace, because the words used by the victims were toxic, aggressive, just a bully. And yet, on the one hand, they want this worker to keep doing all this work, the manager, but they also tacitly were accepting his conduct until he was dismissed summarily. You can't have it both ways. Even if you've got a super duper worker, if you can't rehabilitate them, if they are toxic, you got to cut them loose and give them the leave, because the court gave him that one win. They said, well, hang on, you were entitled to this leave, and we're giving you 10 grand for distress.
Well, the way you've described the case, they picked him up out of Germany and then brought him here. So they obviously thought he was important at one point.
Oh, they wanted the German hard work.
It's getting back to that German, that work ethic. And so the case is it's good. And so whilst the court said that, accepts people in workplaces swear and sometimes swear regularly, and that they can be stressed, and the court said, we're not adopting an angelic standard, but he'd gone too far with his berating. So they know people are going to be potty mouth in workplaces, and this was an industry, like you've got, you're making stuff. So they accepted that people do swear.
Certain rites of passage, that's what I'm getting at, right?
So we're not being angelic, but the repeated action, the aggressive and the disrespect of the subordinate employees and the constant bullying of those employees, that was, you'd gone too far. It wasn't a random OF or O whatever. It was just straight up bullying. And he said, well, you didn't have... But how cute. I love this. One of the defence was, but you didn't have a bullying policy, which is getting back to what you're saying, Alan. To avoid that, you didn't have a bullying policy. have a bullying policy, remember?
You can take the culture out of the person, but you can't take... No, the other way around. You can take the person out of the culture, but you can't take the culture out of the person, right? He wanted German work done, but not the German work style of management.
So that's right. So it was funny because...
But there was a bit of a silly argument saying you didn't have a policy.
Yeah. So the court noted too that the manager, the European supervisor and manager, so management in Europe said, look, and they remind him and say, look, via email, and this is a quote, Aussies, look, they're on a completely different level culturally and in terms of their work ethic than we are. And just reflect on your conduct. So that answers your reasonable management plan. They're saying, look, mate, they're Aussies. They're Aussies. So just, so they were trying...
reflect on your conduct is a pretty big red flag, isn't it?
Yeah, red flag. So they were trying their best, but clearly he was frustrated and distressed, and it was this notion of this German demands, this German work. It wasn't happening. So his defence was, I had no option but to swear, as it were, because they just weren't up to my standard. So it's a fascinating case because it unpacks culture, perception. That's the big word for me, the perception. But more importantly, the system. It wasn't just this manager let loose on Aussie workers. It was the system itself. What were you doing to... And you know what? And like you said before, Alan, this could have all have been resolved maybe if there was a bit more consultation.
Yeah, and maybe at the end had... Well, we don't know. We don't know what happened at the end.
Arbeit.
Arbeit?
Arbeit. That's German for work.
Says Count Van Count.
Wo arbeiten Sie? Yatla. Where do you work? I work at Yatla. And look, I'll end it with that, but it's fascinating because we are a very multicultural society and we do have different attitudes and beliefs and perceptions about what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, what's culturally sensitive, what's culturally not sensitive, and that's without putting alcohol into the mix. So it's a great case, and I urge people to, I'll get the citation, but I do urge people to read it, first of all, about the most extreme case of bullying, but more importantly, about, maybe look at the whole system. That's Sarah's thing.
Educate your mind, because the system keep you blind.
I had a really funny instance happen, and it was perfect timing in terms of something to talk about, something that's contemporary, the right to disconnect, right? We spoke about this in our last recording together, and we were talking about how this arose from teachers' unions and police. Is that right, Trajce?
Yeah, that's right. The two main representative bodies, indeed two very important representative bodies who would probably know a thing or two about disconnecting, who in terms of their own headspace, the police, and so the union representing the police and the teachers' unions representing high school and primary school teachers.
All right, so get this. So my son is in high school, right? He's in year 9, and he's studying, this topic was related to some health sciences, exercise science, etc. And he comes home and he says, oh, I had a hard day. I said, oh, baby, how did you have a hard day? What happened today? Well, I had a test. I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't realize that I'd be tested today, and I likely failed. And I was like, oh, what can you do about this? Because I like to teach some self-sufficient ways to overcome these sorts of obstacles in life. I already spoke to the teacher, Mom. I've already asked if I could do a makeup assignment. I didn't understand this. And I was told I should have looked at some of the emails that were sent, and they were sent on the weekend. So I go, oh, what? Now I'm sure, shared responsibility. There were likely prompts earlier in the week, and totally accept that and completely spoke to him about how to stay on top of work.
But isn't that fascinating that right now, that email's come out? Right now that email came out.
So what I did is I dug through past emails. I get about 300 emails a day on average, so I can miss things. But I had the email, and I remembered seeing it, and I pulled this up, and there was an email from the teacher explaining that, about core curriculum, and this is what will be covered, etc. And then part of the email said, and I will send updates to inform the students on my weekends. It literally says in this email, I will inform students about issues on the weekends, but it didn't say, I expect students and families to engage with these emails on the weekend and be prepared from that Monday to act on whatever my instructions are, right? So it didn't have that part. I just thought, oh, well, that's interesting. I remember at the time thinking, isn't that interesting that you're telling us you're going to be doing this on your weekends? I guess that's a relationship between you and your school, right?
So I see that as a bit hypocritical because the teachers' union is arguing that teachers should be free to disconnect over the weekend, but they're expecting you as a parent to connect over the weekend.
Well, when I questioned this, and I swear I didn't go all American, right? I didn't go I didn't get all tough, right, something like this that you might associate with some of the stereotypes of asserting yourself. I was so polite and saying, hey, how can I help my son? How can I help support your teaching objectives? What can I do to facilitate this best? In fact, I'm happy to share that with you, my approach, and get your evaluation of Sarah's approach. But I was truly trying to understand, how do I make this work, right? How do I help? What's my role? And it was made clear to me, I should say, with exclamation points and underlines, that it's the student's obligation, right? Not the parents. I'm like, well, okay. Part of you goes, right, I pay a hell of a lot of money for this education, and at some point I am actually still a paying customer here, and I'm here to help support my son, so I kind of want to be informed about the obligations to prop this, particularly since this is a topic that I know off the back of my hand, right? This is a topic that I could support my son in while we drive to school, and we often do little test preps in our drive times. So I can do little drills, make it fun, include it in some of our conversations. Our dog walk time, we often do little study rehearsals and make it fairly light. So it was made clear to me, though, that the student has an obligation. So is the student obligated to log on a weekend, connect with that information, be prepared from that Monday to do whatever the action is, study for an exam or whatever. And what happens if the student or the parent asks a question on the weekend? Because I can tell you now, my emails now say at the bottom there, I work, unusual hours and I don't expect your immediate response. Please respect your own working hours, It just helps me get it out of my brain. I also use the delay function in Outlook, a software system that allows me to delay the email sends, so that for some people, team members, whatever, it goes Monday morning instead of Saturday night at 10 p.m. or whatever, as an example, right?
But the central issue, though, is this communication was sent on a Sunday.
And more that it was expected that we engage and respond and connect to it. So if that person wants to send, like I said, that might be your time of your mental space where you send away. But if you're actually expecting others to be responsive and on all the time, that's a different issue. And yet, you heard me go ballistic a little bit when you read the legislation to me and the amendments to the Fair Work Act of 2009, the recent changes at the end of last year, 2023, that explain that, in fact, you're not even supposed to issue communication. More than expecting others to respond, you're not supposed to be issuing communication as an employer, right?
That's a good point.
It didn't talk about teachers. Thank you. I do make good points.
You always, every point you make, Sarah, is a good point.
I tell you.
Alan, you took your time then.
I can't help but dig things up, right? And then pull them apart and then examine them in 20 different angles. And that's what struck me with this legislation. And that's where I said, hang on, this is very colonized kind of response here of someone who expects a traditional 9 to 5 hours. So I don't agree that the legislation speaks in one direction, unidirectional about you cannot administer your communications. What I would rather see, and what I would hope was the intent of that, was that we don't expect you to engage when it's not on your work time, right?
Yeah.
And now, of course, it doesn't...
Or perhaps not on your school time.
Oh, yes, in this case, I would say it doesn't mean to cover all social systems. They can't control the universe, so it wasn't necessarily about teachers and students. But if we're trying to prepare students for the realities of how work is, we need to have a very contemporary approach around this. And expecting students to be on Sunday night, you would think students could say, great, do I get to come in later on a Monday at 10 a.m. instead of my start time since I've engaged for 2 hours on my Sunday evening? You know, you go back to the human rights discussions we've been having, Trajce, right?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, like in terms of boundaries, that's the whole point about this right to disconnect, you know, Monday to Friday, work time, and yes, a student would be expected to be doing assignments, research, etc., but to now plug in and engage in direct correspondence on a Sunday, you know what comes to mind?
What?
And this is what's missing from all of this debate, and if I were making submissions, I would say this, as that song goes, you can have it on a Monday or Tuesday or Thursday, but never on a Sunday, because that's my fun day. That's true, right?
Yeah.
Never on a Sunday, because that's my fun day.
I think the point is, if the situation was reversed and you were asking the teacher to respond on a Sunday, they would immediately say, no, I've got a right to disconnect.
Excuse me,
And
that's right.
what Sara's saying.
That's what I'm saying. So, and you know me, you know I'm, I'm responsive and I work at all weird hours, and I just don't. And so I find this unique that at the same time I'm confronted by the scenario where others expect students or other colleagues to respond immediately.
Yeah.
So I might work unusual hours. I say that again, I don't expect others to have to engage with me outside their open times. Right?
Sara, you have a right to disconnect from yourself.
Cool. Let me unplug.
Hi there.
Unplug.
Disconnect.
I got a neon
you know
t-shirt
what?
on
I know what to
today.
get for Christmas. Sarah, disconnect from Sarah. Sarah, are you the replicant or are you the Sarah?
Last year I was just dying to go on one of those island holidays where you've got like nothing's on your plate. You wake up and you decide to roll over, sleep in, you just sunbake.
You'd go crazy.
You can't.
No, I
because
used
you
to
can't
do that.
disconnect from Sarah.
You wouldn't cope.
No,
Sarah can't
I actually
disconnect from
do.
Sarah.
I really can. I love that. But I can only remember those types of, Asian and Mexican holidays when my 20s, where you just like, I'm going to just go play tennis. I'm going to hang out at the pool. Those type of...
You want that.
I love that.
You want to go back in time yes.
I was craving that, but
I'd like to go back to when I was 22. That'd be nice.
No responsibility.
Guess where I'm heading to now? So I'm doing the antithesis. I'm going where you're like plugged in, dialed in, overstimulated. I'm going to Japan in a couple of weeks, and I'm so excited.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to check out
Excellent.
robotics. I'm going to look at all the neon lights. I'm going boom, boom, boom.
Hey,
Anyway, back to your example.
Yes.
How did it finish up?
Well, it's interesting. It went a little bit back and forth with some communication, and again, I stand by my stance that I was incredibly polite through this and really trying to promote the teaching systems. But when I got copied in, or when others got copied in to the communication, I just politely replied, and I had no context of who everybody else was now in this group email. It's going, while I'm trying to understand what happens on the Sunday night requirements. I politely mentioned, interesting. I imagine that the new amendments to the Fair Work Act about the right to disconnect have not been tested in this instance of teachers and student communication, but it did arise from teachers' unions. So, I look forward to understanding how your school might treat this. In the meantime, I will most readily assist my son to have a look at this. Boom!
That wasn't gentle, that was kaboom.
So
Sarah, lawyer
polite.
it up.
My eyelashes were fluttering as I wrote that email, okay?
Yeah.
And then right now, we've had no official change in procedure, but so far there have been no more weekend emails.
Right. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I reckon teachers all around the country will be, and schools all around the country will be starting to reflect on what this right to disconnect means.
Yeah.
And does it apply in ways that they're not expecting?
And I think more than teachers, it's now going to have a ripple effect throughout multiple industries.
Absolutely.
That's right, because, when the lines blur, when is work day, when's a fun day, and that
You love that song.
I love it.
Blurred lines.
I love it. And I always bring it in. I always try to make a point to circle back into blurred lines.
I picture short skirts and long legs now. I can't help that, right? It's from that song.
Well, my legs aren't that long.
And we've never seen you in a short skirt.
Really?
He's talked about high heels season 1.
He did, yes. Well, there you go.
Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Create a new path, don't let the people follow your signs. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Create a new path, don't let the people follow your signs. In my lifetime, I followed the...
We hope you enjoyed that episode of Why Work. You've been listening to Trajce, Sara and Alan. And if you'd like to know more about some of the things we've talked about today, please subscribe, and we'd be more than happy to provide you with information, names of cases, and other things that may interest you. Please be aware that none of the matters we've talked about today should be construed as legal advice or any other type of advice. We're just here to talk about all things related to work. See you next time.
Never a faker, all my life, an authority hater. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind.